Welcome to Hudson RPO's podcast on racial equality and diversity. Hear from Hudson RPO leaders as they encourage organizations to just start on their D&I journey.
Hello and welcome back to Just Start. I'm joined again by Casey Butler and Gary Jones. And today is Show Our Workday on Just Start. So just to regroup on background. So yeah, we call this thing Just Start because frankly, at the time that we started our podcast journey, we really were also starting on a journey within our organization of really trying to advance a progressive DE&I agenda and really center that at in terms of what we were doing as an organization to an extent that we hadn't done previously. So as we were on our podcasts talking about best practices, talking about some of the pitfalls, in all candor, and oftentimes we were speaking to our own experiences, and we were speaking to our own experiences within our own organization, within our client organizations. We were sort of learning alongside the audience and sort of showing our work along the way in terms of what our learning was. But I do think today it's probably worth pulling back the covers a little bit and sharing, not just here are good things to do as an organization, here are bad things to do, here's what things to consider in return to work, all that sort of thing, but also talk about, what have we been doing apart from getting together bi-weekly to have this conversation. So I guess I'll throw that over to you guys. What have we been doing?
Well, I was just going to add, Jeremiah, I think this might actually be close to our 1-year anniversary for our first episode. Wow. So I think this is probably good timing.
Didn't even intend for that to be the
no. I just think back to when we had the conversation. I believe it was, early summer, and so I think this is right around the time. So it's good, I think, to recap some of the things that we're working on. I can start. I think one of the things that I've really been focused on over the last year, and something that we talked about very early on in the podcast, was just around having safe environments for people to have, conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think we started there, but I think we've come a long way with most recently having done our first DE&I related survey, which, I think if we hadn't built that culture over the last year, everyone feeling comfortable in having these conversations, we may not have gotten the data that we wanted from the survey. So I think for me, that was one of the keys that we have done recently, and one of the things that we've been building up and working our way towards, instead of doing the survey right off the get-go when no one felt comfortable to talk about any of this. I think we really kind of brought ourselves up to that point.
Yeah, that's a good call out. I think, another thing that we did, sometimes you're scared to find out what the answers are, right? That there's some discord, that maybe there's some misalignment, but, actually going to, through the exercise of finding it out, sometimes you don't want to do that, or there's some intrepidation. One of the things we did is we actually truly identified, where our underrepresented groups were within Hudson. Excuse me. And, we could feel it. We actually put some numbers to it, we put some data to it, right? And we now know where those groups are. So part of it was also going through this process of truly identifying where some of the improvement, and some areas of focus that we needed within the organization.
Yeah, and that's a good point on trepidation around what we would find, and I think it sort of speaks to the preparation point that Casey you were making, which is to say that the point of a survey is not to have glowing results and pat yourself on the back, right? The point of the survey is to be able to identify where your gaps are, where your problem areas are, to sort of have that level of insight to be able to start to remediate those things. And if culturally you're not at a place where you can accept that, where you can be open and honest about that, and where you're open to hearing confronting things about your organization and being prepared to action plan on the back of them, like that's the work that needs to happen before a survey happens. Because the worst thing that can happen is you finally go out to your people, survey them around how they're feeling and the sort of the perception around diversity, equity, inclusion, and then nothing follows on from that. That you've asked them to give us something and give us something quite personally, and then they see nothing in return. So I think it's an important point that you don't just barrel into a survey without a plan without one, having the intention of seeing some confronting information, and two, planning to do something about that confronting information. So in that space of doing, what are we doing? Apart from getting that information, what are we actually doing in the space of, concrete action?
Right.
Yeah.
I can start with this one, Casey, if you don't mind. I love the committees that we've actually created. And obviously, Jeremiah, you're chairing the Americas Committee, and it is a collection of many different people within the organization. But the doing part within the committee is something extremely special. And one of the things I want to say is that, when we established the committee and we established, hey, these are the things that we're going to have focus to. One of the things that really stands out is that it is a journey, and we have done some things. We've kind of crumbled it up, threw it out, restarted again, and that's okay. That's quite okay because it's a working type of effort with a whole bunch of people behind it, and the engagement is still there. So when that happened, we didn't lose engagement. We just changed focus, right? To where it's going to be more relevant, to where it's going to be more effective. So one of the things that we've done, I think it's gone a long way, particularly in the Americas and beyond, is establish a dedicated DEI committee to really look at, a plan of action, a strategy, get, feedback from the population at large.
I agree, and I think just to remind everybody, it's not always the diverse people within your organization that should be heading up and spearheading this committee. It's really good to see, a diverse group of individuals who are come together, sorry, and work towards these common goals, because as we've talked many times before, we can't put this on the shoulders of those individuals that are experiencing, are part of the underrepresented groups. We really have to come together and do that as a group. And I think we've done a good job with that as well.
It's a good point. And I do think, it's noteworthy that the committee, the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Committee, is distinct from sort of employee network groups, right? Which are more about specifically supporting the workplace needs of people from historically marginalized groups. This is really open to whoever wants to do the work, and I'm really gratified to see that there are people who are from outside of historically marginalized groups who are really taking the lead on some of these initiatives and doing the work that is to the benefit of their colleagues. So I think that's an important point. Like you don't want to just have the committee look a certain way. It really should be based on who's willing to do the work, and because the work needs doing.
Hey, Jeremiah, I
Yeah.
want to just really quickly, because Casey, what you just mentioned about the year that's passed, I can't believe it's been a year. But the one thing also in our journey and some of the things that we've done, I mean, we've named some of the things we've done. We've done a survey, right? We've organized committees, right? To DEI. We've done some things there, but as you see, it's not a list of 20 things that we've done, right? It takes some time, right, to do those things. And already a year has passed. And that's why it's so important that journey begins as soon as possible and you start doing those types of things. But you can see just some of the impact that we've made just with those few steps, but how much time it took in order for us to make sure that that's happened, right? So that's one of the things I just want to point out in terms of that. So
Yeah, look, it's a really good point, because building the infrastructure and building things takes time. But one thing that didn't take time, and just to wrap up on this, is one thing that I think, independent from us setting up this infrastructure, independent from us building a more sophisticated vehicle to deliver DE&I programs, one thing that we did early on, just without direction, just as a leadership committee, was just agree that we had a lot of hiring to do, and diversity was going to be a priority for us when we undertook that hiring. And I do think, without any fancy program in place, without a strategy that was in place, just from a place of pure intention, and
Mhm.
commitment,
Mhm.
we actually had a lot of success in this space. Any comment on that you guys would like to make?
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that because, again, it's this whole concept of from the top down, right? And this is where we all agreed as a leadership group that this was going to be something we're just going to do. And we weren't sure how we were going to do it. Like we didn't necessarily have a plan in place, but we committed to doing it. And I think you're right, Jeremiah, that didn't take a lot of time to come together and all agree that this is important. Like, so if you can get to that point and then you figure it out as you go along, and as you mentioned, Gary, we agree that it's okay to fail. We're not going to keep doing something if it's not working. And so I think for me, you're right. When I think back, didn't take a lot of time to make that decision.
Right. And I think the plan was this, even though we didn't illustrate, this complex plan, but to both of your points, the low-lying fruit was our priority, right? To get this thing running, get it off the ground. There's some prerequisites, right, that has to happen. Obviously, we need to have total engagement, to Jeremiah's point. But when we look at our plan, it doesn't have to be this robust, complex third-party vendor. You can start doing these types of things internally, and you can prioritize by looking at some low-lying fruit things that you can actually accomplish to really, again, get the buzz going and get this thing off the ground. And as you continue to build into it, then you go and tackle more complex things that might happen along the way. But great points.
Yeah, I think it's important though, Jeremiah. I don't know if it was you or Gary who called it out. It's not like 50 items on a list that you have to complete. Like slow down, because if you make the list too big, I feel like you go back and you look at it and it's overwhelming and you feel like you're not going to get any of it done. Whereas if you start small and then as you check off some items and accomplish them, then you can start to add a few more things to the list. It doesn't have to be the entire journey right up front. These are all the things we want to accomplish. Start small and work your way up, because I think otherwise, I think a lot of organizations see this as an overwhelming task.
Mhm.
Yeah, and look, I mean, the other piece is, it's also not the wrong approach necessarily to define a lot of goals that you want to accomplish, but again, to be strategic about how you do that, and to be more committed to qualitative outcomes than about like executing on those 50 things, right? It's less about, I said at the start of the year I'm going to do these 50 things in the space of DE, and have I done them? That doesn't really matter. What matters is the impact those things are having. So if you're discovering along the way that, they're not having the impact that you thought, they're more difficult to stand up than you thought, it's not the best place to be spending our time. It's also a decision about like, let's not be afraid to say this isn't it, right? Because as we've discussed on this forum a number of times, like nobody's nailed this. So if you're following a script, thinking if you do this set of things, you're going to create the inclusive nirvana, like this is not going to happen. So really just continuously iterate as you're along that journey and question like, is this working? And if not, should I be doing something else?
And the best way to do that is to look at the numbers, right? Like you said, that's the best way to do it. We're a quarter in. Have we moved the needle? We're 2 quarters in. Have we moved the needle? And so I think that's a great call out.
Yeah, and as we're taking notes, if we're taking notes, one of the things that we have to do is really kind of look at, what's worked for us. Again, as we said, as we share our journey, right? And so what we're discussing today is hey, number one is we created engagement through surveys. We identified where our areas were through data collection, right? In terms of which groups are representing our company and our organization, right? And which aren't. And then we also put a call to action within the group itself, right? And created committees. And to your point, Casey, these committees consist of an eclectic group, not just your minority or underrepresented groups that you're trying to, obviously focus on, but a collective group of minds, diversity of thought per se. And that's the 3 things that I'm hearing that we really did within this past year was effective for us, right?
Well, Gary, in the spirit of doing work for others, you totally just did my job and did a tremendous
I was thinking the same
wrap
thing.
up on the discussion. I have nothing else to add to that. So nailed it.
That's an example of collaboration. And see, we've worked together so long. We actually think for each other. So
I love it. 'Cause Lord knows I'm not doing the thinking today. So as always, guys, it was an awesome conversation. I'm glad we were having this opportunity to show our work with the audience. We'll continue to do this from time to time. I do think it's important, and I appreciate your perspective today, as always. So, Casey, Gary, good to see you. We'll do it again soon.
absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you, folks.
Bye, everyone.
To speak with any of today's participants about your Just Start journey, email juststart@hudsonrpo.com.